Let the carnage begin!
Happy little games. Boy oh boy do I love racing games. Ever since I was knee-high to a grasshopper, I can recall sitting on my dad's lap and steering the wheel driving around Kmart's parking lot. My love for piloting cars has not diminished, having grown up with racing games such as Outrun and Power Drift that allowed me to drive like a bat out of hell, crashing into anything that moves. Today, we are going to take a look at a game that was one of the staples of the Super Nintendo era. This isometric racer featured vehicular combat, a crazy loudmouth announcer, and unprecedented music to boot. No, I'm not talking about country music racing.
On the road again. I just can't wait to get on the road again.
I'm talking about the fantastic 1993 Super Nintendo game Rock and Roll Racing. What 1985 racing game inspired this game? What music did the designers originally want in this game? Let's find out as we learn about the history of rock and roll racing. To learn about the entire history of rock and roll racing, we have to start with the game Motocross on the Intellivision. This was designed by Rick Levine in 1981 as a follow-up to his realistic PBA bowling for the same system. His team didn't have access to a development system, so they would have to commute an hour each way 3 times a week just to work on the project. After tiring of the commute, Mr. Levine left the company, and months later, Rick Koenig came on board and attempted to complete the game. Everything was scrapped except for Mr. Levine's basic concept and graphics. Motocross was very realistic for its time, featuring a few different options such as racing against the clock, against the computer, or another player. 3 different racetracks are included, as well as a track editor to create your own tracks. Racing Destruction Set by Electronic Arts was designed by Rick Koenig and used the same engine that he created for Motocross for the Intellivision. This game initially appeared on the Commodore 64 and Atari 8-bit line of computers in 1985 and is a 1 or 2 player racing game. The game uses an isometric viewpoint with 50 built-in tracks. If that's not enough to tickle your taint, you also have the ability to create your own tracks. Curves, jumps, crossovers, etc. are all at your disposal. Something else that was unheard of at the time was the customization in which you could change the terrain, allowing for sandy slopes or slippery stretches of ice. One of my favorites to do back in the day was changing the gravity, allowing you to essentially race on the moon. You had a number of different vehicles such as sports cars, jeeps, lunar rovers, dirt bikes, and more. You can also change other aspects of the car, including tires and engines. There are 2 modes available, with the first one being just a standard race, and the second one being destruction mode, in which the player can drop landmines and oil slicks from the back of their vehicle. It's not much to look at by today's standards, but underneath that lanky, janky, stanky exterior is a fun little game with plenty of options. The game was a giant success, becoming the 3rd best-selling game on the Commodore 64 in 1987. Fast forward to the year 1991 when development was started on a new Super Nintendo racing game by the name of Radical Psycho Machines, or RPM Racing. It was designed by Silicon and Synapse and published by Interplay Productions. This game took inspiration from EA's Racing Destruction Set and even ported over the logic engine and track editor from that game. This title also introduced a number of firsts in the industry, such as this one being the first Super Nintendo title to be created entirely here in the USA. The first thing that catches your eye when playing this are the graphics. This game runs in double resolution mode, which makes everything look very detailed, but it comes at a cost. Certain games might use this mode for the menus, but not for the entire game. Instead of the standard 256 colors, they were limited to just 16. This game did feature a level editor with 6 save slots for your creations. It was also the first game on the Super Nintendo to feature split-screen racing. It was also the first racing game to control really, really bad. It might look pretty, but it controls like a Jurassic turd. The team was also inspired by another racing game, RC Pro-Am on the NES. Which brings us to 1992. A follow-up to RPM Racing was in development, codenamed RPM 2. Alan Pavlich was the producer and designer of the follow-up and had this to say: "We liked RPM Racing, but we wanted to do something better. This meant upgrading the gameplay, graphics, and especially the sound. If you're listening to good music while you're driving, you tend to drive faster." Early in development, it was decided to license rock music, but they had to make sure the pace of the game matched the music, which meant sitting with the programmers and designing the physics. They wanted the cars to be able to slide around the corners and for the players to have a nice feel over their car. It wasn't just sliding around corners either, it was bouncing off the walls or bumping into other cars as they collided into one another. They just wanted the controls to feel natural. Something else that was introduced in Racing Destruction Set were the RPG elements. They wanted the player to be able to upgrade their cars, giving the feeling of actually progressing through the story, which is what most popular RPGs do. There would be several different characters to choose from, each with 2 different attributes ranging from acceleration, cornering, top speed, and jumping. To ensure that the RPG elements would be implemented properly into the game, the team actually played the game out on paper. There were maybe 5 or 6 of us sitting around the table, and each one would pick a car. We would then roll some dice to randomly decide who would win. Then we would go around the room, rolling the dice to see what place we would come in and what we would get. A half hour on paper design meant you could see the progression and if it was working or not. The developers wanted to use the sync license, which allowed them to use MIDI versions of the music, but not the actual recording of the lyrics or the performance of the song itself. This meant they would have to re-record all of the music themselves for use in the game. They had started out with a list of 100 songs that could potentially go in the game and then whittled it down from there. Originally, the team contacted rock and roll icons ZZ Top to create what they thought might be called ZZ Top's Racing, but the band wanted a ridiculous amount of money, so that idea was nixed. Next on the list was Led Zeppelin, who just flat out refused and didn't want any part of it. Out of the 100 on the list, most of them were either too expensive or not available for use in video games. They ended up with 6 songs that they felt could get your heart pumping and your motor running and was able to be obtained very cheap. The final audio element to be added was the wacky and zany announcer by the name of Larry Huffman, who always sounded like he had just won a race in the Pro Meth 100. Partway through development, Silicon and Synapse would change their name to Blizzard, the same Blizzard we all know and love today.
Flicker is about to blow. Rip is dominating the race. Rip jams into first.
Rock and Roll Racing was released for the Super Nintendo in 1993. As the story goes, you select one of 7 heroes, each one with different attributes, as you have to race against criminals, machines, geniuses, and more to become the king of rock and roll racing. This is a 1 or 2 player vehicular combat racing game that uses an isometric viewpoint, allowing you to slide around the track with the greatest of ease. The 7 heroes you can select are Snake Sanders, Cyberhawk, Ivan Zeifer, Katarina Lyons, Jake Badlands, and Tarkin. Olaf is a hidden character who previously appeared in Interplay's other title, The Lost Vikings. The races take place on a number of different planets. The planets you can race on depend on the difficulty you selected. On Rookie, you can only race on the first 3. On Veteran, you can reach the 5th, but on Warrior, you can race on all 6. The 6 areas you get to race in are Chem 6,
Rip fades into last.
Draconis,
Olaf jams into first.
Bogmire,
Last lap.
New Mojave,
Olaf is about to blow. Olaf jams into first. Olaf gets hammered.
No. And Inferno.
Olaf lights him up. Olaf is dominant.
Each race has 4 contestants, including yourself, the twins Rip and Shred, who follow you from planet to planet, and the 4th competitor is a local racer and is usually more of a challenge than either Shred or Rip. Each race consists of 4 laps around the track in which you have to watch out for the oil slicks, lava, snow drifts, and other obstacles depending on the planet you are racing on. There are also various hills and dips you have to contend with, and you need to be careful not to accidentally jump over the guardrails. Each vehicle has a primary weapon to aid you in your quest for glory, along with the ability to drop mines, tire spikes, and nitro boosts, which are all at your disposal. Since this is a vehicular combat game, there is a heavy emphasis on attacking the other player's vehicles. Even if they are blown up, they will reappear a few seconds later, lagging behind everyone else. Thankfully, there are health power-ups and money littered throughout the tracks. Players are rewarded with a monetary attack bonus each time they finish off another car with their forward or rear weapons. You also get a lapping bonus every time you get a 1-lap lead on your opponent. The object of the game, obviously, is to come in first, and if you do, you are awarded money which can be used to purchase several different cars along with various upgrades for each one. Some of the upgrades you can purchase are for the body, engine, shocks, and tires. You also have a number of cars available for purchase, each with different weapons, including the Dirt Devil, Airblade, Havoc, and more. Along with the tight gameplay comes the fantastic audio. In addition to the music, which I will get to in just a moment, there is a commentator by the name of Loudmouth Larry who offers such words of wisdom as,
Fades into last. Spin out. Last lap is about to blow. The stage is set. The green flag drops. Let the carnage begin.
The character of Larry was voiced by Larry Huffman, who was an actual Speedway announcer.
Hello, everyone. I'm Larry Huffman. With me to call the action, David Stanfield. And David Stanfield, the fans are coming in, and a lot of people are here tonight to see what you've called the El Cajon Zone.
The music, by far, is the most memorable aspect of the game. The developers really showcased the Super Nintendo's audio capabilities because these are fantastic versions of classic rock songs. Mr. Pavlish was correct, and that if you hear rock music playing, it makes you want to put the pedal to the metal and drive just a little bit crazier. The 6 songs they were successfully able to license, and hopefully I can play these without a copyright strike, are Born to be Wild,
Last lap. Shred is about to blow.
Highway Star.
First. Flash is about to blow. Flash fades into last. Olaf powers up. Olaf lights him up. Flash was lost out there.
Peter Gunn.
Drops. Viper is about to blow. Viper jams into first. Olaf is dominating the race. Trent is lost out there.
Paranoid.
Let the carnage begin! Rip is about to blow! Grinder fades into last. Olaf jams into first.
And Bad to the Bone.
The stage is set. The green flag drops. Roadkill is about to blow. Olaf fades into last. Spin out. Olaf hits the warp.
Thankfully, there is a password system in place which you will definitely need because the game is quite lengthy. The game was a huge success for the company, and a Sega Genesis version was also released the following year, which I will cover at the end of the video. A version for the 3DO interactive multiplayer was announced and was scheduled to be released in 1995, but it was cancelled. In 1997, a sequel was released for the PlayStation in Europe entitled Rock 'n' Roll Racing 2 Red Asphalt. Here in the States, the Rock 'n' Roll moniker was dropped and it was known simply as Red Asphalt. By simply playing this for a few minutes, you can see why the Rock 'n' Roll name was dropped, because this is more of a Wipeout clone than anything else. Each car has built-in weapons such as guns and mines to take out your opponent, and the more enemies you kill, the more it counts towards your points. If you finish in the lead, you'll earn more cash to upgrade your vehicle, buying better weapons and better armor. There is no licensed music in the game, but overall the sound effects aren't too bad. The graphics, on the other hand, are just kind of there. While not horrible, they're not really attractive either. You do experience some occasional clipping throughout the game as well. The controls are a bit touchy, and it tends to get more frustrating the longer you play. One of my absolute favorite Super Nintendo hacks would be the MSU1 hack for Rock 'n' Roll Racing. For those of you who don't know, the MSU1 is a custom coprocessor which enables playback of CD quality lossless audio for your favorite Super Nintendo games. This allows ROM hacks for use with your favorite Super Nintendo emulator to replace the background music of games with high-quality versions that would not be possible on a standard cartridge. These can even play full-motion video. Rock 'n' Roll Racing gets even better with this, since now you are rocking out to the actual song straight from the albums. There is no way I can show this on my channel without getting a copyright strike, so if you're curious, just Google it. In 2013, the game Motor Rock was released on Steam. The development title was Rock 'n' Roll Racing 3D, but this was an unauthorized remake of the original. The 3D graphics are fantastic and it feels like rock and roll racing at its core. Unfortunately, the game lasted approximately a week on Steam when it was unceremoniously pulled from the store due to licensing issues. There are many similarities with the original title, including the same racers such as Tarquin and Snake, only with a slightly different name. The soundtrack even uses variations of Highway Star, Paranoid, and others. A classic announcer option that uses the actual voice samples from the Genesis game was also included. Since they can no longer legally sell it, the company released it as a free download on their website. In 2021, the Blizzard Arcade Collection was released for Nintendo Switch, PlayStation 4, and Xbox One. This is a digital collection of Blizzard's original hits, although ironically enough, none of them were ever released in the arcades. Inside, we have RPM Racing, The Lost Vikings, Rock and Roll Racing, Blackthorn, and The Lost Vikings 2. Included in the extras are interviews with the developers, various pieces of artwork, manuals, Nintendo Power ads, and more. The cream of the crop, in my opinion, is the definitive edition of Rock and Roll Racing and The Lost Vikings. Rock and Roll Racing includes 4-player simultaneous play, as well as the actual rock songs from each artist, including some extras thrown in such as Judas Priest, Breaking the Law, and Radar Love, which was a Sega Genesis exclusive. If you don't like the actual songs, you can switch back over to the MIDI versions, but from what I've seen, these are only the Sega Genesis tunes and not the superior Super Nintendo offerings. One song that didn't make the cut was Paranoid. All this for $20 is a pretty good deal, and this should be the template on how to release a remastered collection. The Sega Genesis version was released in 1994. This looks very similar to the Super Nintendo offering, although not quite as detailed. Gameplay is pretty much the same across the board, but the big change is with the audio. There are not as many sound samples from Loudmouth Larry as found in the Super Nintendo version, and the ones that we do get are not quite as clear. As far as the music goes, in my opinion, it's not as good as the Super Nintendo, but your view may differ. The Genesis version sounds really tinny, which doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing, just different. Something else I notice is that the music mutes completely whenever Loudmouth Larry is announcing. This doesn't happen in the Super Nintendo version. The Genesis version, however, has Radar Love, which was missing from both the Super Nintendo and Game Boy Advance versions.
Snake hits the warp! Snake is dominating the race! Snake launches himself! Butcher looks lost out there! Last lap! Snake hits the warp! Shred is about to blow!
Speaking of the Sega Genesis, it received a pretty cool hack entitled Rock and Roll Racing Hack V16, which can be found at romhacking.net. This includes online multiplayer support for 2 to 6 players, MP3 support, increased colors, 208 new tracks, new planets, new characters including some of the Battletoads, and more.
Rash looks lost out there. Rep fades into last. Snake is about to blow. Ryback lights him up. Rash fades into last.
In 2003, the Game Boy Advance received a version of Rock and Roll Racing. This is very similar to the Super Nintendo port, although this time you're given 6 save slots courtesy of the battery backup as opposed to having to use the pesky password system. 2 players can race simultaneously by use of the link cable for multiplayer madness on the go. The soundtrack is really good, and it even features all of the sound samples from Loudmouth Larry.
Viper jams into first. Viper fades into last. Hawk jams into first.
Rock and Roll Racing is definitely one of a kind and one of my favorite racers on the Super Nintendo, right next to Mario Kart. If you've never had a chance to try this game out and you love classic rock and roll music, you owe it to yourself to give this game a shot. You'll be glad you did. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Also, if you would like to support me on Patreon, please click the link below. If you would like to contribute but not sign up for my Patreon, you could always use the donate button up above. Thanks everybody for watching.